to our intercultural learning series. In this video, we're going to be looking at barriers to intercultural adaptability. It sounds so easy working across cultures. Once we know about another place or another culture, we learn about their working style, we make a few changes, and we're good to go. Despite it sounding easy, it's often something we struggle with in application. So in this video, we're going to be looking at common barriers that prevent us from being as adaptive as we'd like to be and how we can overcome those barriers. I'd like to start with a case study and a story sharing from a technology company based in northern China that recently started a new application of having Indian and Chinese colleagues have an open town forum that they could all join in and share what was happening in their market or in their division in order to exchange more information. On the surface, it sounded great. These are two teams that needed to work together and needed to exchange information. In reality, it was a struggle to implement. Let's take a look at some of the feedback from team members here in China about how that went. Let's look at what the employees had to say. There's so many people talking, and it seems like about nothing important. What is it that people want me to do? Another colleague said, "It's not like me to brag about my work in front of my colleagues. My work should speak for itself." And then a third colleague added, "Why do I even have to join this meeting? It feels like a waste of my time and doesn't create any benefit." I selected these three quotes because they represent three of the common barriers that we see. So as we take a look at these three barriers, I want you to be thinking about which of these quotes is the best match to those barriers. Let's take a look at them. The first barrier, the competence barrier, is that feeling that knowledge and skills are not up to the task of providing new intercultural work behavior. When we experience this barrier, we might feel anxiety, embarrassment, or even shame. The second barrier that we experience is the authenticity barrier, the feeling new behaviors are somehow in conflict with our values and beliefs. This can create a feeling of anxiety, stress, or even guilt. The final barrier is the resentment barrier, that feeling that intercultural adaptation is a burden or an imposition. We often experience frustration or anger when we're experiencing this barrier. If you think back to the three examples we looked at, each example is matched to one of these barriers. We had one colleague say, "Why should I have to change? It's not fair." That sense of resentment is really something we pick up on right away. We had another colleague concerned about boasting or bragging, feeling like this was not the right kind of behavior, the right values were not present. And finally, we had one colleague who just didn't know what to do. They didn't have the confidence or the skill set in order to adapt to their scenario. So when we're facing a barrier, how can we assess what this barrier is? I'd like to give you a simple tool that can help you with assessing the barrier you're currently experiencing. By answering two questions, we can fill in a simple matrix to let us know which barriers we're facing. The first question is, how well can I do this? And the second question is, does this behavior feel genuine? If we answer, I can do this well, but it doesn't feel like my genuine behavior, we know that we're facing an authenticity challenge. If we say, I really can't do this well and it doesn't feel like me, we're facing a double challenge. And we need to be looking at some creative ways to connect and to build our skills. And of course, if we say, this does feel like something I can do, but I don't know how to do it, it's a capability challenge. In an ideal world, where it feels like something we can do, and it feels like something we should do, we call this our comfort zone. And it's usually not when we need to be worrying about adaptation. So the next time you're encountering a difficult situation across cultures, you can look at these two questions and begin to assess how you want to address your adaptation opportunity. Let's take a look at what our employees at this company did in order to begin to adapt. They picked small, significant changes that helped open up the door for them to work better with their colleagues in India. One colleague, coming out of these group discussions, said, I'd like to have more one-to-one time with a few key colleagues. Being from northern China, she discovered she had a passion that some of her Indian colleagues had which was to drink tea. So she set up virtual tea sessions to share and to understand what individual colleagues were doing. This opened up more doors later in group sharing. In another case, we had some members who said, I like facilitating meetings. Maybe I can actively step up with preparing some open questions that could create a structured feel for our team members in China and help us to be more prepared as we begin. A third colleague said, I think this is a good chance for us to share bios and topics that we'd like to talk about in advance so that we have more influence over the direction of these open forums. And yet another colleague said, well, when I travel for India, why shouldn't I join the open forum from the India side? These 4 small but very significant changes opened up the doors to make sure they had better relationships and better collaboration by finding things that were closer to their value structures, that were authentic to them, and that they knew how to do. By addressing these barriers in a constructive way, they were able to collaborate and work well together. Intercultural barriers are something that we're going to have to face as we work across cultures. Let's take a look at some of the scenarios or some of the situations where we're going to want to be mindful of these barriers. Our first application is to our own intercultural and diverse teams, removing our barriers to adapting to their working styles. We can then begin to look outside our organization, looking at ways for us to better understand our key vendors and key suppliers and the working styles that they have. Continuing on this external journey, we might want to look at our own customers. Do we have barriers to understanding their needs and requests that we can begin to adapt to more effectively? And even at a macro level, the markets and consumer behaviors that we're trying to target and become better adapted to. Finally, we might want to look at our own families. We have cross-location, cross-generation, and even gender areas for us to adapt and remove barriers that might be holding us back. This takes us to our final checklist of our video, where we look at different things we can take back and apply directly by identifying, understanding, and adapting to the way we work. Let's look. First, identify if you're currently experiencing any of the barriers with the grid that we used earlier by evaluating our feelings and by looking at how we answered those 2 questions. Next, understand what's the reason you feel this way and how you see the current gap. Look into if there isn't a better way for you to connect with other people. And finally, adapt by finding a behavior that you can start to do that is within your skill sets or that aligns with an appropriate value for you that can be small yet significant. When you're able to do these 3 steps, you'll find yourselves removing barriers and working more effectively with people across cultures. I hope this video has been helpful for you, and we look forward to having you back in the future. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.